to drive.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Cathaoirleach, before I get into a fairly limited response to the stability programme update because of the time we have, I just want to stop and call out what's happening here in the Dáil right now. The stability programme update is a serious document. It is the start of the budgetary process as acknowledged in official documentation. It is not just a technical and statistical document as the Taoiseach stated it was this morning. The stability programme update sets the expenditure ceilings for the country for next year. This document frames the budget. And so a detailed discussion of what's in this document is very important. As an example, there was a table in last year's stability programme update that did all manner of highly technical adjustments to things like expected growth rate, expected inflation, that radically changed the fiscal space that was available for this year. So things that are happening and not happening in Ireland today are directly related to technical analysis contained in last year's stability programme update. This is not a technical and statistical piece of backup analysis. It frames the entire budgetary process. Now let's look at what's happened. We got this at 10 o'clock last night, but weren't told, so I picked it up at 7:30 this morning. We found out yesterday that there would be statements on this very important document today. Minister Noonan, Acting Minister Noonan and Acting Minister Howland came into the chamber, made speeches which they clearly had a lot of time and a lot of resources to prepare. They tolerated Deputies McGrath and Deputies Doherty, and they then left. And with genuine respect for the minister who was sitting opposite representing the government, the minister's remit and department is arts, heritage and the Gaeltacht. I mean, this is absolutely no disrespect to the minister who was here, but the minister's remit is arts, heritage and the Gaeltacht. So this debate is absolute nonsense. Now the Minister Howland, or Acting Minister Noonan,
For the debate rather than the debate.
I can comment on whatever I want, Cathaoirleach. I'll comment on whatever I want, quite frankly. It's very relevant that neither the Minister Noonan nor Minister Howland thought it fit to even listen to what the Oireachtas, to what the Dáil had to say about the start of the budgetary process. So it's very relevant that neither of them are here. Now, Mr. Noonan stated that he would take on board feedback from the chamber. How can we give meaningful feedback with about 2 hours preparation, no meeting with finance officials, no briefings, nothing, it can't be done. And B, even if we could, how would Minister Noonan and Minister Howland take our feedback and incorporate it into this? How could they possibly do that? The Minister himself stated that the document had to be with the European Commission tomorrow or Friday by the latest. So I just want to call out what's going on here. This is meant to be new politics, political reform. And in fact, the OECD put together a thorough review of Ireland's budgetary process just last autumn. Here's one of the things they said. To be effective, the measures proposed, these are the measures coming out of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform for better parliamentary engagement, the measures proposed will need to be underpinned by a renewed commitment by government at political and administrative levels to engage with the Oireachtas as a partner throughout the budget process. Now, it's difficult to quite explain how I feel about what's going on here this morning without using unparliamentary language. So I will leave it at that. But this is nonsense. It is an insult to the Dáil. It is an insult to the independents and the political parties. We would very happily, the finance spokespeople or appointed people, would very happily and gladly have met with finance officials, with the two ministers. This is important stuff. And it's interesting, Cathaoirleach, on the back page, page 47, is a copy of a letter from Professor John McHale in his capacity as chair of the Fiscal Advisory Council. dated the 20th of April. So quite some time ago. We're now at the 27th of April. So a week ago, Professor McHale was able to write to the General Secretary and state that the Council was provided with the SPU forecasts on the 7th of April. So now we're going back 20 days. So 20 days ago, the department gave these figures to the Fiscal Advisory Council. 7 days ago, the Fiscal Advisory Council wrote back to the department and said, broadly, we're okay with your projections. And today, the day before this legally has to be sent to Europe, finally, we in the Dáil get to see it and debate it without either of the ministers present. Now, I actually had several questions from Ministers Noonan and Ministers Howland based on what they had to say.
Point of order. The impression being created that there's no representative.
That's not
of
a
the
point of
government.
order, Deputy.
I'm sorry, the information is wrong. The point
It's
of
not
order,
a point of order.
The impression being created that the government is not represented. The government
That's not a point
is
of
sitting
order.
here and officials are sitting here taking notes.
That's
it is
not a
totally
point of order, as well as the Deputy knows. That's not a point of order. It's more bombast and nonsense from that side of
The
the
Deputy
House,
without
frankly.
interruption, please, at this stage. Thank you.
Now, I had several questions for the two ministers. I will happily, Deputy, put them to Minister Humphreys, but I doubt Minister Humphreys is in a position to answer the technical
The
questions
Deputy
that
without
I
interruption,
have.
please.
Possibly is right. Don't be so pompous.
The Deputy without interruption.
The questions I have include what level of demographic adjustment has been made to the fiscal space? Why is the fiscal space not laid out in this? Does the underlying fiscal space include projected overruns of 500 million? How is the projected overrun broken down? What percentage of inflation assumption has been applied to the expenditure ceiling for this year? Because last year the assumption was incorrect. Now, with the time I have left for what is essentially a meaningless debate, I want to say this. It is good news that we hear from the ministers that the fiscal space is potentially 900 million. Now, if we have expenditure overruns, which the SPU says we could have to the tune of 500 million, personally I believe it'll be a lot more, that will come down. However, it is imperative that whatever fiscal space is available is used for investment. Part of the defining debate in the election was whether or not the USC should be abolished. The Social Democrats took a position that says we need to maintain the existing tax base as it is. The government said we should cut taxes further. Now, the situation we have today, we found out yesterday that the broadband programme rollout will be delayed by up to 2 years. We found out yesterday that patients on the public health system are waiting up to 25 times longer for important scans in oncology than patients on the private system. We know from AGSI that they need to be hiring and training about 800 additional Gardaí and that they're under-resourced to the tune of 20%. We know that 1 in 9 children in the country, Cathaoirleach, is living in consistent poverty. And we know that the capital expenditure programme set out in this SPU is one of the lowest in the EU, which opens us up to very significant social and economic risks and challenges. Further, the argument given by the previous government to reduce the tax base further was that we need to make work pay. I think that was the phrase that got used. The OECD last week released the latest analysis on the so-called tax wedge for OECD countries, 34 countries. This is a combination of tax on work and tax on employers related to work. And what it shows is that for a one-earning married couple with 2 children, Ireland has the lowest tax wedge in the OECD. Of the 4 examples given, Ireland was in the lowest 7 countries in terms of tax on work in the OECD. So I'll finish here, Cathaoirleach. We don't need to erode the tax base further. We need to maintain a stable tax base and we need to invest. And I would request, as Deputy Doherty did, that detailed briefings, whilst they're too late for the SPU, the detailed briefings are provided by the Department of Finance. We need to start preparing for the budgetary cycle now. We're going to need access to finance officials to go through a lot of this in detail. Thank you.
Deputy Eamon Ryan. Thank you, Deputy.